Hello, everyone. We are here on the Second Act Show. I'm John Tarnoff.
I'm Carrie Hannon.
And we are the Sonny and Cher of Second Act careers.
I got you, babe,
Coming to you live from Los Angeles and Washington, D.C. And for those of you who are joining us for the first time, I'm going to read from my little card. The Second Act Show is a fun, breezy, but provocative 30-minute conversation about the challenges and opportunities to create your meaningful, purposeful Second Act career. And we're broadcasting every other week here on LinkedIn, Facebook, and YouTube. The audio only will be up on podcasts, wherever podcasts are available. And this week, we are very pleased to have our friend and colleague, Mark Miller, with us, talking about revising retirement. Let's bring him on right now. There he is.
Hey, John. Hi, Carrie.
Hey, how are you?
Great. Thanks
Good
for
to see
inviting
Mark.
me.
Great to have you with us. So let's get a little promo out of the way, just so we don't forget this. Carrie has a book coming out, and then you've got a book coming out later in the year. So why don't you guys talk a little bit about that just for a second?
Well, I'm going to let my guest go first.
Yeah, I have a book coming out actually in January 2023. It's hard to get used to these schedules in book publishing when you're used to publishing something every week. But the book is called Retirement Reboot: Common Sense Strategies for Getting Back on Track. And it's basically a book aimed at people who are within sort of the 10-year or so window leading up to retirement, but are at that point and are not financially prepared. And so what are some late in the game moves you can make to improve outcomes? That's what it's all about.
Really relevant to our conversation. And so we're going to want to circle back on some of those ideas during our conversation. So I would be remiss if I did not do a proper introduction for Mark Miller, and I'm just going to make sure I get it right. So Mark is a journalist, author, and podcaster with a national reputation, absolutely, as a top expert on retirement and aging. And at age 68, and he looks phenomenal. He is asking many of the same questions facing millions of other older Americans, which is why we're all here today. Mark has more than 15 years of experience covering this field. Mark contributes regularly to the New York Times retiring column, which appears in the Sunday edition, so maybe tomorrow, or Sunday, where they are among the best read personal finance stories in the paper. He also writes monthly national columns on retirement for Reuters, Morningstar, and Wealth Management. Mark's website is retirementrevised.com, and you can sign up for the newsletter and listen to his podcast, which is phenomenal. And it features interviews with authoritative experts in the field of retirement, including somewhere in the archives, Carrie and me.
Yep, you guys were one of the first episodes, if I recall.
And this is why we wanted to have you on, so we could return the favor, such as it is. So the big question, and I am, as you know, the anti-retirement naysayer, is retirement over? And that's a broad question, I know.
Yeah,
but
meaning that
let's start
when people ask that, I hear the question as, is nobody going to retire anymore? That's the way I interpret that question. And so my answer to that would be, no, retirement is not over.
Yeah.
And I would say that because for a number of reasons. I think while I am a huge fan of the themes that you're doing on this show, which have to do with purpose and how you extend purpose into later life. And I've done a lot of writing about the value you can get out of working longer from a financial standpoint, as well as from an emotional and purpose standpoint. So I'm a big fan of all that. I think all the evidence suggests that it's a phenomenon limited to kind of white collar, better educated, upscale households. I mean, people working on factory floors aren't just not going to work forever. They can't do it physically. They don't want to do it. The data on, to the extent that Social Security claiming ages are a proxy for when people are retiring, and I would say it's not a perfect proxy, but it's reasonably good. Most people have filed for Social Security by the time they reach their full retirement age for Social Security, which is 66. I think it's maybe 10 or 15% that are filing at very later ages, i.e. my advanced age, 69, 70.
to max out, right?
Can you remind people, Mark, who might not know that why we tell people often if they can wait?
Sure. So Social Security, you have a choice to file as young as 62. We're talking about the retirement benefit now because disability is another matter. And you can wait as long as 70 to claim your benefit. And the longer you wait, the higher the monthly benefit amount is. And it all revolves around what's called the full retirement age. It's very confusing semantically, I think. But full retirement means that's the age at which you are entitled to 100% of the benefit you've earned by dint of your working career. Mm-hmm. So 100% is full retirement age. It's generally, for most folks now, 66 in a few months. Mm-hmm. The reason that's a little vague is that it's a moving target. The last time Social Security was reformed in 1983, the full retirement age was shifted. It used to be 65, and it was raised to 67 gradually over many years. And so it's been moving up in increments of a month or two. So right now, for most people, it's about 66 and change, and ultimately it'll be 67. So at any rate, back to your question about retirement being over, the Social Security data is telling us that people are still retiring at sort of, kind of more typical ages. If you look at just the entire population, and, baby boom generation is 75 million people. So there's no generalizing. Some people will never retire, no doubt about it. But I think the majority of people still are going to be living in retirement for some portion of their lives.
But Mark, one of the things that you know so much about, which I'm always kind of in awe, is Medicare, right? And the fact is, people don't realize that Medicare is not the end of it. There's a lot more to what we're going to spend in our medical expenses when we're retired. You're still going to have additional costs, which are pretty significant. And I just find it, people think, oh, I'm on Medicare, then I'm set. But that's not really the case, is it?
And I just put up this headline here, which is an article that you just put up about the new privatization activities that are going on Medicare. So it would be great to talk about this whole thing.
Sure. Yeah, those are two distinct topics, I think. To Carrie's point, the cost of healthcare retirement is definitely one of the larger ones. I don't think it mitigates what I was saying a minute ago about the end of retirement, because I think people retire when they retire. I think,
right.
You often hear these very big, scary sounding numbers about the cost of healthcare and retirement. The projection that people will spend $300,000 over the course of retirement, that sort of thing.
The Fidelity numbers.
Yeah, Fidelity. There's a few others too that they all come out about the same one, right? And those are based on, basically what you do is you take the expected Medicare premiums, the expected out-of-pocket expense, and multiply it by an average longevity. So that's where those big numbers come from. But the reality is that, you don't pay it all at once, thank goodness. You pay it out every year. You pay it as you go. And about 40% of it is Medicare premiums. And so that part is pretty smooth and more or less predictable. I mean, the premiums change, but
it's still a couple $100 a month, right, Mark? I mean, I think my husband's is over, $300-400 a month.
Well, so the average Medicare beneficiary spends about a little under $6,000 a year out of pocket. Okay. And so, what is that? That's your Part B premium. It's your Part D drug, as in prescription drug premium, perhaps a Medigap supplemental plan. That's if you're in traditional Medicare. And if you're in Medicare Advantage, which is kind of the managed care alternative version, it's kind of simpler because it's an all-in-one solution. You're still paying your Part B premium. The two sides of this equation, though, are the premiums and the out-of-pocket costs. And so what I've been focusing quite a bit in my own writing lately on, and I've explained this in the book too, is to pay attention not only to your premium costs, but what is your liability on the out-of-pocket side. And that varies depending on the choices that you make in terms of Medicare enrollment. So, for example, if you join Medicare Advantage plans, those come with a built-in cap on total out-of-pocket expenditures exclusive of drugs. It's generally about a little over $5,000 a year. So if in a year that you use a lot of healthcare, in addition to premiums, you might be on the hook for up to $5,000 or so. If you're in traditional Medicare, you have the option of choosing a Medigap supplemental plan that might cover almost all of that out of pocket, but you'd have this additional, monthly premium. And there's different ways to make that work. But those are the two sides of it. And then the big wild card, of course, on healthcare is the possibility of a long-term care expense.
Yeah,
generally occurs later in life.
But Mark, simply they don't. It still doesn't cover stuff that older people really need, like hearing aids, right? That's still not part of it. Or did that go through? And dental. I mean,
yeah, did not. It was proposed in the Build Back Better Act, and Medicare. What I would say about Medicare is it's a great program, and it could definitely stand to be a lot better.
So tell us about your article go ahead, John.
Well, I just wanted to just interject something about Medicare, which is in the context of continuing to work, is that if you continue to work and earn income, you're going to get dinged on your Social Security. You're going to get deductions taken out because of the amount of money that you're making in salary or income.
Well, to clarify, the ding is on your Medicare premium. So there is what's called a high income premium surcharge that kicks in if you have ordinary income over certain amounts. And there's a specific formula for that. It moves up in tiers, but if you're still working, like myself, I enrolled in Medicare this year because I'd been on my wife's plan at work for a long time, and I figured it was time to eat the home cooking. And it was a very interesting process to actually go through signing up for it. After having written so much about it, I actually learned a bunch more.
You're a good reporter.
Yeah, and I actually wrote a column about that. Is what is it like to sign up? But so because I'm still working and my wife's still working, I pay the first tier of the surcharge. It's like $70 a month. Yeah. Do I enjoy paying extra for no additional services? No, but it's still, it's a manageable thing. And Medicare is still a great deal, even with those surcharges. But if you either are working and on Medicare, or if you just happen to have high income, which can definitely happen, more affluent households, just the types of income that are coming in that are taxable, say from a 401k account would be an example. So yes, you can wind up spending a little bit more on it.
So what about the article that you wrote? What's the big takeaway from that?
Yeah, so this is something that's kind of been flying under the radar. I'm surprised there hasn't been more focus on it, but there's been a tremendous amount of privatization in Medicare over the years. People talk about Medicare as government insurance, and it is because government's the primary payer. But there's an enormous amount of private sector participation in Medicare. The prescription drug marketplace is populated entirely by commercial offerings. Medicare Advantage is all commercially offered HMO and PPO stuff. Traditional Medicare is sort of the last vestige of mostly non-privatized. In other words, it's fee-for-service healthcare. You go to the doctor, the bill goes into Medicare, Medicare pays the bill. And while Medigap is offered by private insurance companies for the most part, traditional Medicare is not privatized. But Medicare is moving on a process now to change that with the introduction of basically third-party intermediaries who would be responsible for administering care almost in a similar way to a managed care Medicare Advantage plan would do. And so it's kicking up quite a bit of controversy. And they're called they're called accountable care organizations. They're typically, they could be medical groups run by physicians. They could be run out of hospitals. They can also be run by commercial insurers. There's a huge rush of money coming into this market from private equity firms and the like, because the perception is it's an opportunity, sort of the last great opportunity for increased market share in Medicare, because more than half of the Medicare market is still traditional Medicare. So there's a big fight going on over this right now, and advocates of single payer and those who are not fans of privatized Medicare, and I include myself in that group, are very concerned about what it would mean to privatize the traditional program, hence the headline, the end of traditional Medicare as we know it. Yeah. So I think it's something we're going to be reading more about of this year.
So Mark, just to kind of be clear, so to kind of clear up my confusion about this. So
it's a very confusing topic.
So this is different from the Part B supplemental plans that I have. I'm sure a lot of people, most people have.
The supplemental, that's Medigap, which you buy if you're in traditional Medicare to cover out of pockets. And to control out-of-pocket costs. So that's kind of the only real.
Well, it's either a PPO or an HMO kind of a style plan.
No,
right?
Medigap is not a PPO. Medigap is something that you buy on top of traditional Medicare. So you enroll in Part B, and you get a Medigap to cover your deductibles and out of pockets. The big risk in traditional Medicare is a hospitalization, where there's a pretty heavy cost sharing component and no total cap on cost. So if you have a catastrophic event, you're on the hook for thousands and thousands of dollars. So the managed care side is all in Medicare Advantage, which is separate from traditional Medicare.
Right. So all of these. So I have there are these confusing letters that go on these plans. So these are all. What are those plans?
Within Medigap, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's different lettered options within Medigap that basically come with different amounts of protection, the percentage of out of pocket that's going to be covered. And while it can be kind of intimidating looking when you're first shopping it, the good news is most people wind up with just a handful, choosing between a handful of those letters. And the other good news is that they're all standardized. So a Medigap D plan offered from one company has got to be the same in terms of the benefit features as a D from another provider. And a D in California has to be the same as a D in New York, and so on. So there's a great deal of standardization there, which is a good thing because it adds some, reduces some of the complexity.
Mark,
but all that's going to go away if these new plans come in.
Well, it's a question. It's a question. What does it mean? Because it wouldn't immediately go away, but Medicare is saying that they want everybody enrolled in one of these accountable care organizations by 2030. And then we'll sort of see where it goes. It's an open question, what it looks like at that point.
Mark, are there any ways we can cut these costs as a consumer? Is it like if you're, do you have any takeaway advice there?
I do. Well, in Medigap, one thing I think is interesting as a way to cut premium cost is that one option there is to buy a high deductible Medigap plan. So for example, G as in George plans, you can often find a high deductible option there. So rather than spending, say, a couple $1,000s a year on premiums for Medigap, you might pay $700 or $800, but it comes with a $2,400 annual deductible. You're going to be on the hook for the first 24. Essentially, it's a way of insuring against really high costs. But if in a year when you're healthy and not spending much, you've got this low premium and you've saved money. So I think that's a really interesting option worth considering. The other thing I would suggest is that very few people bother to reshop their Part D drug coverage annually or even every few years. And it's really worth doing because the plan offerings change from year to year, and it's worth rechecking and reshopping. It's easy to do on the Medicare website where you just go in and plug in your medications and it'll come back and tell you what the best fit plans are for you. And many people, I think, are wasting money by staying in the same plans year after year without bothering to recheck. It's the one part of Medicare where it's pretty easy to move every year, and probably more people ought to be doing that than are doing it.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So
if you have an HSA plan, last thing I'll say is if you have a health savings account, those can be used to pay for some Medicare costs, but you have to look carefully at what things can and can't be paid for out of an HSA. For example, you can't pay for a Medigap premium out of an HSA. Why? I have no idea. The system is so darn complicated. I mean, I often joke, it's like, it makes it possible for somebody like me to make a living explaining it, but that's not optimal. I mean, frankly, a simpler system would be really desirable.
But why did you get interested in this? I mean, it really is I hate to use the word arcane because maybe it's not that, but for most of us, it's like, oh my gosh, let's glaze over. But you have such zest for it. I mean, why is that?
Well, I mean, I really stumbled into this. Most of my career was spent in business and financial news, and then around 2003 or 4, I was working at Tribune Company in Chicago, the publisher of the Chicago Tribune. And I was in a group that was doing new product development. And I had this idea that maybe there was a publication to do for people thinking about the next phase of life. Because I was starting to think about it myself, and I was noticing a lot of my friends talking. It was one of those just personal gut insights. And I thought, gee, maybe there's something here. And so I started digging into it. And then I start realizing that the age wave in the United States was going to just be this enormous economic opportunity and fact of life. And that secondly, anytime you are looking at these kind of life transitions from one thing to another, there's always an information market opportunity, right? Well, you know this in publishing that, you can think of lots of examples, publications or now websites about how to buy your first house, how to shop for a college, how to pull off a wedding. It's on and on. So we thought at the company that there was an opportunity there, and we launched a magazine and website about it called Satisfaction Magazine, borrowed from the Stones. The magazine failed after a few years, but I had bitten by the bug and decided I was going to go off and keep looking at this. And the further I went, I just saw that there was tremendous need for good coverage of these key topics, whether it's Social Security, Medicare, saving for retirement, healthcare, and all the rest. And that's how I fell into it. And I love all these topics. I find Social Security and Medicare, I find endlessly fascinating and interesting. And they're the most important cornerstones, in my view, of retirement security.
Well, we're grateful for it. Yeah.
How has the beat changed since you started, and how have your attitudes changed since you started doing this?
Yeah, good question. So I think one thing that's changed is better awareness of the importance of Social Security than when I first started. I think the reporting on the program has gotten, generally speaking, better, a little less superficial. One of the things I observed at the outset when I started doing this was that so much of personal finance journalism comes out of New York, and which is, of course, for obvious reasons, kind of Wall Street centric. And Social Security is just another beast. And I think the personal finance press in New York, at the time anyway, didn't do a great job covering it. I think does a much better job now, much less subject to some of the sort of the myths and misunderstandings about Social Security. So that's, I think, one big change that has occurred in terms of my own perceptions. Yeah, go ahead.
But Mark, also what I think as a consumer or as an individual with a Social Security, they've the ability to go to their website, which really, I know everyone complains about it, but frankly, it's neat to have the electronic access that you can actually, they've helped us in many ways to demystify it a bit, don't you think?
The Social Security Administration has really solid information on its site. What I'd love to see is better tools. Better decision-making tools. And I think they have a number of them, but they're kind of rudimentary. I actually did a column on this for the New York Times a few weeks ago about kind of the latest that's going on with Social Security decision tools that people can use. And there's some really slick solutions now. Some of them are free, some of them with a modest fee, where you plug in some basic information about your benefit. And if you're married, you can do it as a couple for kind of spousal coordination and get really sophisticated suggested strategies back. That's all occurring in the private sector.
So those aren't on the site. Those are outside of the Social Security.
I mean, there's some very basic ones on the site, but it's not really where the strength is of the SSA site. The strength of the SSA site is more informative than it is decision making. So I think they could be doing more to help people make smart decisions.
Your statement is nice, I think, in a way that we used to cost them. I like being able to see my statement online in a way where I used to it would come and then you wouldn't really look at it. But now you can say, oh, yeah, that's interesting.
And they reformatted the statement recently. It's better. It's easier to understand. Unfortunately, they don't mail the darn thing out anymore to most people. You only get it if you're over a certain age. And that, to me, is really dumb. I think the SSA ought to restore the mailing of the statement every year.
It's expensive.
This is a way to get in front of people.
Or at least email it.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, expensive. It costs $60 million
you're
a
saying
year.
People who don't have computers, because so many of us can access it pretty easily. But
but it's remembering to do it. Not that many. You have to set up an online account. Not that many. Not enough people have done it. Millions of people have done it, but not enough. So it's a great annual reminder of your benefit, and I would like to see people getting it in the mail.
Yeah. No, you're right.
If you're online, you have to have an email address to log into the site because they're going to send you a verification code.
Right.
So Mark, to shift a little bit, I
want to, before you go, Jerry, I just want to nail Mark on the question of how his attitudes, Mark, how have your attitudes changed about the work, certainly, but about in terms of your own life and your own perception of the institution of Social Security, of Medicare, and how's your thinking evolved?
I've become more of a fan of social insurance than I was when I first started. Social insurance meaning Social Security and Medicare, and a bit less of a fan of kind of the private sector segment of retirement solutions. I think there's been a lot of really good advances made in the field of retirement saving. The big ones I would cite are the moving towards a lower fee, simple investing solutions like index funds, and very importantly, huge growth of the use of target date funds that kind of automated the balancing of your assets as you get closer to retirement. There are critics of target date funds, and it's a little bit of a one size fits all approach, but by and large, it's done really good things for millions of people. So I think
but we need help in taking money out when we're ready to, right? I mean, that's still the big hole.
That's the next frontier, I think, for employer plans, is figuring out that sort of so-called decumulation side. But we don't have good solutions, for example, in the long-term care arena. And that's been something that's been left to the private sector and has not been able to figure it out.
Yeah.
When you look at plans that are having the most impact for the most people, pound for pound, it's Social Security and Medicare, just hands down.
Yeah.
So that's been my evolution, is sort of just coming to an understanding of just the huge importance of social insurance. I have a couple chapters in the new book about it, including I closed the book with a chapter arguing for why we need kind of a new era of social insurance, that we need to return to that. It's not even a commonly used phrase anymore.
I want to kind of take that point and kind of wrap this into certainly my pet peeve about the traditional retirement at 65 idea, and ask you about, in this more fragmented world that we're getting into, where indeed some people will retire at 65 or earlier, some people will be forced for various conditions, caregiving, health reasons, et cetera, to retire earlier. Some will work longer.
Yes.
What can we do, or how should we be strategizing as a society to allow for all of these different scenarios? And then how, as individuals, should we be planning to address these as we get older, make decisions about when we're going to stop working, how long, what conditions, downsizing, finances, what can we live with, all that.
Right. That's a great question. I think the big challenge in answering it these days is that we are living in a period of such uncertainty. When you think about all the uncertainty we're dealing with at this moment, starting with COVID, what is the path of the virus? I think that is critical to understanding, whether older people will be able to continue to work or go back to work. That's a huge one. We've got inflation resurgent for the first time in a couple decades, and it looks like it's kind of here to stay at some level. What does that mean for retirement plans? You look at the gyrations going on in real estate prices, the fact that interest rates appear poised to start rising. The stock market is generally, not this last week, but generally it's been doing great. How long will that last? Open question. So when you think about how you're going to live in retirement, and this is really a basic theme of my coming book, is, retirement security is all about the ability to replace pre-retirement income. In other words, how do you maintain your standard of living? Social Security, generally speaking, will replace no more than 40% of pre-retirement income for an individual. That means you're on the hook to fill that gap from savings or something else. The math is a little different for married couples, but nonetheless, as a rule of thumb, that's what you're looking at. So that and the other rule of thumb is they say you need 70, 80% of your pre-retirement income in retirement. So how are you going to get from the 40 to the 80? And if you're looking at saving, all these questions about the uncertainty of the market and interest rates are important. And then how much can you afford to draw down annually at a safe level? And that's, Carrie, I'm sure you've written about this plenty. There's a big debate out there about what sort of the safe withdrawal number is. Traditionally, people said it was 4%. Now I think the latest research is saying it's a little high. Maybe 3% is the right number. Or you need a flexible approach, and maybe you need to ratchet it down in years when the market's down. So those are all the questions. And I wish I had a nice, simple answer to it.
But just get people thinking about it. I think the more people can start planning, I think, Mark, we found from our reporting as well that very few people actually do a plan and actually run a calculator. Even if it's just the most basic, that doesn't actually, it gets you thinking about it, instead of, hold hard when you get there and go, oh my goodness, what's going to happen here? Instead of really putting that map in place. And just to wrap up, because we're almost at time, and I know John may have a follow-up, but so when are you going to retire, my friend? Okay. We got a book coming out,
Yeah. Well, it'll be at least a couple of years because I got the book to flog next year. No, I don't know. I'm fortunate in that I moved into this mode of being an independent writer 10, 15 years ago, which means that it's not an on-off switch situation. So, I write for 3 or 4 different outlets, as you mentioned. And, at any given time, if I decided I wanted to lighten up, I could certainly start to do that by tossing off this or that relationship and kind of put it on a downslope. I haven't really decided yet, but I'm getting involved in a lot of sort of, passion projects on the side too. You know about one of them, Carrie.
Yeah, can you say that quickly? I know we're.
Yeah, I'm involved in trying to save local journalism here in Evanston, Illinois, where I live, with the founding of a nonprofit news site that's become like a part-time job. I'm a musician, as you also know, so I play in a couple of bands, and I'm involved. I love politics and all kinds of things. So I'm not worried at all about how I'll fill the time.
You're not going to be bored.
my golf clubs are at the ready as well. So I'm not at all concerned about that. I'm a new grandparent, so I got a lot going on in my life. So I think it's going to be one of these gradual readjusts.
Yeah.
I will probably keep writing in this area for some time to come, but maybe right now I'm generating 4 or 5 articles a month. Would I be at a point a year from 2 from now where I'm only doing 2 or 3, or maybe I will.
Because you do speaking as well. You do lots of stuff that makes a difference in the world. John, you have any last ones for our guest here?
No, I think this has been great. I think it's gone long because it's so fascinating and there's so much to talk about. We could be going for another half hour easily. So I just want to kind of segue into looking at the future for the show, and just bring up our next show, which is going to be in 2 weeks. Elizabeth White, the age solutions advocate and the author of 55 Underemployed and Faking Normal, is going to be our guest in 2 weeks. So we're looking forward to working that angle and see what's going on with Elizabeth. And thanks so much for joining us today, Mark, and for everyone to tune into the show. And we're building some traction here, so we'll keep doing this and keep having some fun with it.
Yeah, thanks very much for inviting me.
Yeah, it was fun. Bye, John. Good to be with you.
Bye, Carrie.